The room went quiet the moment she smiled, not a warm smile, not a polite one, the kind of smile people wear when they already know the ending, and you don't. She lifted her glass slowly, the crystal catching the chandelier light, and said, calmly, clearly, in front of everyone, she is no longer part of this family. No shouting. No drama, just one sentence, and somehow, that was worse. I stood there, my hands locked together so tightly my nails cut into my skin. To my right stood my husband, close enough that I could feel his warmth, but he didn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on the marble floor as if it held answers he was too afraid to read. That was the moment I understood something important. I had already lost this house, I just didn't know how much it was going to cost me. The party was supposed to celebrate 30 years of marriage. 300 guests, New York money, old family power, people who smiled with their teeth and measured you with their eyes. I had spent hours getting ready. A dress chosen carefully, not too bold, not too plain, makeup soft enough to look obedient, heels low enough not to offend. I had learned those rules quickly. Blend in. Don't stand out. Don't speak unless spoken to, and most importantly, don't embarrass the family. Funny how none of that mattered in the end, because when she said those words, no one asked why, not a single person, they just accepted it, like this was always how the story was meant to go. I waited for him to say something, anything. A word, a glance, a lie, even, but he stayed silent. That silence told me everything I needed to know. 3 years earlier, I had walked into this family believing I was marrying a man. What I actually married was a system. A house where loyalty flowed upward, where love was conditional, and where power wore perfume and pearls. She controlled everything, the money, the staff, the security, even the air felt monitored. My phone was checked. My schedule questioned. My tone corrected. At first, it was subtle. Why did you come back late? Who were you talking to? You don't need friends like that. Then it became routine, drivers reporting where I went, housekeepers repeating my words, private security watching me like I was a threat, and my husband, he called it care. She just worries, he'd say, she knows what's best. I stopped arguing, then I stopped explaining, eventually, I stopped talking altogether. Silence became my survival, but silence has a price. It eats you from the inside until one day you realize you don't recognize your own thoughts anymore. That night, after the announcement, they didn't ask me to leave, they didn't need to point. 2 guards appeared quietly at my side, not aggressive, not rough. Professional. One of them leaned in and said softly, "Ma'am, we'll escort you to your room." My room, not our room, not his room. Mine. As if I had already been separated. As I walked away, I felt hundreds of eyes on my back, not sympathy, not shock, curiosity. People love watching someone fall, especially when it's done politely. The door closed behind me with a sound that felt permanent. I sat on the edge of the bed and finally let my hands shake. I didn't cry, not yet. Because somewhere deep inside, beneath the fear and humiliation, something else had started to grow. Clarity. They thought removing me publicly would break me, that I would beg, apologize, disappear quietly. They were wrong, because while they were busy controlling my movements, they had underestimated one thing: I had been paying attention. Every conversation, every financial argument, every secret whispered behind closed doors. I knew where the money moved. I knew which charities were fake, which accounts didn't match, which deals were never meant to be seen. I had learned to listen without reacting. To observe without being noticed. They thought I was weak. What I actually was prepared. That night, alone in that room, I made a decision. I wouldn't fight them loudly. I wouldn't confront them directly. I would let them feel safe, comfortable, powerful, and then, when they least expected it, I would take everything they believed was untouchable, not for revenge, for freedom, because if I stayed silent any longer, this house wouldn't just own my life. It would bury it, and I wasn't ready to disappear, not yet. The first mistake they made was thinking I had nowhere to go. They let me stay in the house, different wing, different hallway, different rules. What they didn't realize was that distance gave me something I hadn't had before: time to think, time to remember, time to connect the dots I had been quietly collecting for years. The next morning, I woke up to silence. No messages. No instructions. No schedule pinned to my door. That should have scared me. Instead, it felt like breathing for the first time underwater. Downstairs, the house moved like a machine. Staff avoided eye contact. Security nodded but didn't smile. I was no longer a family member. I was a liability. At breakfast, she didn't look at me. She didn't need to. Control doesn't shout. It assumes obedience. My husband sat across the table, scrolling through his phone, his jaw tight. I watched him carefully. He wasn't angry. He wasn't sad. He was nervous. That told me something important. Men like him don't fear losing people. They fear losing protection, and the protection he'd always had was sitting at the head of the table, calmly stirring her coffee like nothing had changed. That's when I knew this wasn't over, not even close. Later that afternoon, I received my first offer. A woman from the family's legal team knocked on my door, polite, efficient, well-trained. She didn't sit down. She handed me a folder. Inside was a settlement, a non-disclosure agreement, a quiet exit, money in exchange for silence, enough to disappear comfortably, enough to never come back. I looked at the number and almost laughed. They really believed this was about money. I'll need time to think, I said. She smiled. Of course. But not too much. After she left, I locked the door and pulled out the second phone, the one they didn't know about. It had taken months to hide. A cheap device. No cloud backups. No shared accounts. On it were photos, audio clips, screenshots, nothing dramatic on its own, but together, a map, charity funds rerouted, shell companies linked through third parties, payments that didn't match reported income, things that would raise questions. Things that could attract attention, the kind of attention power hates. That night, I made my first call, not to a lawyer, not to the police. To someone who owed me a favor, someone who had once warned me, you don't know what kind of family you married into. Back then, I hadn't listened. Now, I did. Over the next few days, the house changed, subtle at first, security doubled, staff rotated, rooms locked that were never locked before. Paranoia had entered the building. She still didn't confront me. She didn't need to. Instead, my husband tried. He came to my door one evening, voice soft, eyes rehearsed. We can fix this, he said, you just have to cooperate. Cooperate, the word tasted bitter. Fix what? I asked. You already chose. He flinched. That was new. I protected you, he snapped. You don't understand how dangerous this could get. Dangerous, not heartbreaking, not unfair, dangerous. That's when it finally clicked. He wasn't afraid for me. He was afraid of what I knew. I let him talk, let him explain, let him threaten without raising his voice. People reveal everything when they believe they're still in control. After he left, I added another note to my mental list. Then I waited. 3 days later, the offer changed. More money. Stricter silence, faster timeline. They wanted me gone. That meant the pressure was working. On the fifth night, something unexpected happened. I was followed, not by security. By someone who didn't belong to the house. A car I didn't recognize parked across the street, engine running, watching. I didn't panic. I memorized, because fear clouds judgment and I couldn't afford that anymore. I went back inside and made another call, this time, to someone who specialized in messes like this. Someone who didn't scare easily. By the end of the week, I had options. Not exits, weapons. They still thought this was a negotiation. They still believed I wanted to leave quietly. What they didn't understand was that I wasn't planning to walk away. I was planning to walk through them, slowly, legally, publicly, because when powerful people fall, they don't fall from screams, they fall from exposure, and I had waited long enough. The house thought it owned me. Soon, it would learn the difference between control and illusion. Power doesn't collapse all at once. It fractures quietly, carefully, behind closed doors. By the second week, I noticed the first crack. A meeting was cancelled without explanation. A car left the driveway and didn't return. Phone calls that used to be returned instantly now went unanswered. The house was still beautiful, still expensive, still intimidating, but something underneath it had started to rot. She called me into her office for the first time since the party. That alone was significant. No intermediaries. No lawyers, just her. The room smelled like old money and fresh flowers, walls lined with awards that didn't belong to her, but carried her name anyway. She didn't offer me a seat. She never did. You've been making people nervous, she said, her voice smooth, controlled. I didn't realize silence was so threatening, I replied. Her eyes flicked up for half a second. There it was, recognition. You're not as smart as you think, she said. This ends one way. I nodded. You're right. It does. That answer unsettled her. Predators recognize unpredictability, they fear it. She leaned back slightly. You sign the agreement. You leave. This disappears. And if I don't? Her smile returned, thinner this time. Then you'll regret it. That was the first direct threat she'd ever made. It should have scared me. Instead, it confirmed everything. That night, I didn't sleep, not because I was afraid, but because I was busy. Files were copied, backups created, timelines organized. I didn't keep everything, only what mattered. Truth is heavy. You don't carry it all at once, you choose where to apply pressure. The next morning, I left the house alone. No driver. No escort. That alone caused panic. By noon, 3 people had tried to reach me. By evening, Sixth, I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I met with someone who had no loyalty to the family, only to facts. He studied the documents quietly. No reaction. No commentary. Then he looked at me and said, "Do you know what this is worth?" "Yes," I said, "my freedom." He nodded once. "That's expensive. But possible." When I returned to the house that night, security was waiting, not to stop me. To confirm I was still alive. That told me more than words ever could. My husband avoided me completely now. No speeches. No guilt. No concern. He had moved on to survival mode, which meant he had already accepted one thing: someone was going down. He just hoped it wouldn't be him. 2 days later, the charity board resigned officially, for personal reasons. Unofficially, because someone had started asking questions with documentation, questions with timelines, questions that didn't care about family names. The first article didn't name anyone. It didn't need to. It described patterns, numbers, discrepancies. People who understood money knew exactly what they were reading. That evening, the house exploded, phones rang, doors slammed. Voices raised for the first time in years. She lost control, and when control slips, truth leaks. I stood at the top of the staircase, listening, not interfering, not celebrating, observing, because this wasn't the end, this was the opening. Later that night, my husband came to my door again. He looked different, smaller. "You're destroying everything," he said. "This will ruin us." Us, the word felt dishonest. "I warned you," I replied. "You just didn't listen." He swallowed hard. "What do you want?" There it was, the question that comes right before power changes hands. I stepped closer, close enough that he had to look at me. "I want my name back," I said, "my life, my voice." "And if we give you that?" I held his gaze. "You're already too late." He understood then, not completely but enough, because the next morning federal interest became official. Not arrests, not yet, requests, inquiries, audits, the kind that don't go away, the kind that end careers. The family name still stood, for now, but it was bleeding, and everyone in that house knew exactly who had opened the wound, including me. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I waited. Because real endings don't arrive with explosions, they arrive with consequences. Betrayal doesn't always come from enemies. Sometimes it sleeps beside you, learns your habits, memorizes your fears, and waits. I discovered his betrayal the way most truths surface, by accident. A forwarded email sent too fast, sent to the wrong address. It wasn't dramatic. No threats. No confessions, just logistics, dates, accounts, instructions. He had been preparing for my removal long before the party. Long before the silence, long before the guards. He had helped structure the settlements, helped draft the narratives, helped decide how I would be described once I was gone. Unstable, emotionally compromised, difficult to manage. He had rehearsed my disappearance like a business exit, and somehow that hurt more than everything else combined, because it meant he had never hesitated. I didn't confront him, not yet. I needed to understand the full shape of the knife before deciding where to place it. That night, I went somewhere I wasn't supposed to be, the basement archive, locked, monitored, ignored. Power forgets the places it believes are beneath it. I used a code I had memorized years ago, back when I was still trusted. Inside were boxes, old contracts, property transfers, original agreements, things that predated me, things that explained everything. She hadn't built the empire alone, she had inherited it, and she had stolen part of it, from her own sister. A sister erased from photographs, documents quietly amended, payments redirected. The family story had been rewritten. That's when I understood why loyalty mattered so much, why silence was enforced, why questions were dangerous. This wasn't just about control. It was about exposure. I photographed everything, not in bulk, not recklessly, selectively, because when you pull one thread, you don't want the fabric to collapse too early. The next day, I received a message from an unknown number. "Stop. Just that. No signature. No explanation." I didn't reply. Within hours, another message arrived. "We can still fix this." I smiled. For the first time in weeks. They were negotiating. That meant they were afraid. I met my husband that evening in the kitchen. Neutral ground. No witnesses. He looked exhausted. "You found something," he said. "Not a question." "Yes," I replied. He closed his eyes briefly. "Give it back." "Give what back?" I asked. "The truth?" He opened his eyes. "They'll destroy you." "They already tried," I said. "They failed." His voice cracked then, just slightly. "You don't understand how deep this goes." "I understand enough," I said, "and now so do others." That was the moment he realized he'd bet on the wrong side. He reached for me instinctively, stopped himself. Too late for comfort, too late for forgiveness. The next article was published 2 days later. This one named names, not accusations, connections, relationships, patterns, the sister, the missing funds, the rewritten history. It spread fast, not viral, respectable. The kind of story people in suits read carefully and never forget. By evening, lawyers were calling, banks were reviewing, boards were freezing assets. The house fell silent again, but this silence was different. It was hollow. She didn't call for me, she didn't threaten, she locked herself in her office and didn't come out. Power was recalculating. That night, I packed a single bag, not to run. Be ready. Because the final phase never announces itself. It arrives disguised as calm. I left the house just before midnight. No one stopped me. No one followed. Outside, the city felt enormous, uncontrolled, alive. For the first time in years, I wasn't being watched, and for the first time I wasn't waiting for permission. They thought the story was about revenge. It wasn't. It was about ownership, and I was done being owned. The end wasn't close yet, but it was inevitable, because once a lie is exposed, it doesn't survive quietly. It fights, and I was ready for the fight. The counterattack didn't come with noise, it came with precision. Bank accounts I had access to were frozen overnight. My credit cards declined. A lease application was suddenly under review. Not coincidence, coordination. They were reminding Medhap power doesn't need to shout when it knows exactly where to squeeze. By morning, 3 different people had concerns about my mental state. Concern is a useful word. It sounds gentle. It cuts deep. A lawyer I'd never met suggested a temporary evaluation. A friend I hadn't spoken to in years asked if I was doing okay. They were building a narrative again, only this time I was readied. I met my advisor in a small office downtown. No names on the door. No unnecessary windows. He didn't look surprised when I told him. They're escalating, he said. That means the exposure is working. They're trying to erase me, I replied. He nodded. Then we anchor you in public reality. That afternoon I did something they didn't expect. I spoke, not to the press, not loudly. To records, affidavits. Timestamp statements, independent witnesses. Facts don't panic, they persist. That night, my husband called. For the first time in weeks, his voice wasn't controlled. You don't know what you're triggering, he said. This isn't just family anymore. I know, I replied. That's why it matters. There was a pause, then, quietly, they'll sacrifice someone. I closed my eyes. Who? I asked. He didn't answer. That silence was the answer point. 2 days later, the story shifted. A mid-level executive resigned, publicly, graciously, privately. He was the offering. They framed it as accountability. A correction. A clean break. But it wasn't enough, because the questions didn't stop. They multiplied. Every attempt to control the damage created another trail. Emails surfaced. Transactions linked, dates aligned too neatly to ignore. The city started paying attention, not emotionally, strategically, the kind of attention that calculates outcomes. Late one evening, I received a call from a blocked number. Her voice calm, tired, sharp. You've made your point, she said. End this. You should have ended it years ago, I replied. A pause. What do you want? She asked. The same question again. This time I answered without hesitation. I want separation, I said. Public. Legal. Permanent. And if I refuse? You already lost the ability to refuse. Silence stretched, then, almost imperceptibly, her tone changed. Not anger, respect. Careful, she said. Freedom comes with consequences. So does control, I replied. The line went dead. That night I didn't sleep, not from fear, from anticipation, because something fundamental had shifted. They weren't chasing me anymore, they were containing themselves, and containment is the step right before collapse. The next morning an injunction was filed, not against me, against the foundation. Operations suspended, accounts audited. Leadership questioned. It wasn't dramatic. It was devastating. By evening, my husband texted one sentence. I didn't think you'd survive this. I stared at the screen, then typed back, you never tried to see if I could. I turned off the phone, because at some point you stop arguing with the past, you step into the future and let it explain itself. This wasn't victory, not yet, but it was momentum, and momentum, once it belongs to truth, doesn't reverse quietly. They had played their strongest move. It hadn't worked. What came next would decide everything. The legal phase didn't feel like justice. It felt like surgery, cold, methodical, unemotional. Courtrooms don't care about pain, they care about proof, and proof was something I had learned to carry lightly like a weapon disguised as paperwork. The injunction triggered a chain reaction. Accounts flagged, donors alerted, partners quietly stepping back. No one wanted to be last holding the rope when the structure finally gave way. I sat through meetings where people avoided my eyes, speaking in careful language, as if emotions could contaminate facts. That was fine. I wasn't there to be understood. I was there to be documented. Across the table, their legal team looked polished, expensive, confident, but confidence has a smell, and this wasn't it. This was containment. They weren't trying to win anymore, they were trying to survive. My husband was called to testify on a technical matter, nothing dramatic, just clarification. I watched him from the back of the room. He looked thinner, older. Power ages people when it stops protecting them. When he saw me, his expression didn't change, but his posture did. He knew. On the stand, he spoke carefully, too carefully, every answer measured, every pause calculated. He was still trying to protect the system, but systems don't protect individuals once they become inconvenient. Halfway through, a document was introduced. An email chain, his email chain, instructions, approvals, signatures. The room shifted, not gasps, not whispers, attention. That was worse. He tried to explain, contextualize, reframe. But facts don't respond to tone, they sit there unimpressed. When he stepped down, he didn't look at me. He didn't have to. I already knew the choice he'd made. Later that evening, he finally called, not to argue, not to threaten. To ask, is there any way out? He said. I closed my eyes. For you? I asked. Yes. I exhaled slowly. Tell the truth. Fully. A pause. And them? I didn't answer, because some questions already contain their endings. The next morning he didn't show up, instead his lawyer did. By afternoon a sealed statement was filed. Cooperation. That was the moment the balance tipped. You could feel it. Even outside the courtroom, people stopped returning her calls, meetings were postponed indefinitely, support evaporated. Power hates isolation. She had ruled through networks, through loyalty, through fear, and now those networks were folding inward. I received one final message from her that night. No threats. No bargaining, just one sentence. You think this makes you free? I stared at it for a long time, then I deleted it, because freedom doesn't need permission, and it doesn't argue with ghosts. The following week, the settlement was announced, public, controlled, damaging, leadership resigned, assets restructured, statements released. No prison. No spectacle. That would come later, in quieter ways. The house was sold, discreetly, quickly. I was no longer mentioned. That was intentional. They wanted to erase me again. This time I let them, because I wasn't disappearing. I was exiting. On my terms. On my last day in the city, I walked past the building where it had all started. Glass, steel, reflections everywhere. I saw myself in one of them, not smaller, not broken, different, someone who knew the cost of silence and paid it once, never again. This wasn't the ending people expect. No applause. No victory speeches, just distance, and distance, I had learned, is the most honest form of peace. The story wasn't finished yet, but it no longer belonged to them. It belonged to consequences, and consequences were finally catching up. Fallout doesn't explode. It settles like dust after a demolition, quiet, unavoidable, everywhere. The city moved on faster than I expected. It always does. Headlines faded, names stopped trending, new scandals replaced old ones. That's how power survives. By counting on short memory. But inside the system, nothing was the same. The foundation didn't reopen. Too many questions, too many conditions. Investors withdrew carefully, as if stepping away from something contagious. Former allies issued statements that said nothing and meant everything. Distance became fashionable. I stayed out of sight, not hiding, recovering. For the first time in years, my days weren't scheduled. My phone didn't vibrate with expectations. No one asked where I was going. Silence returned. But this time, it was mine. I heard about him through others. He'd relocated, changed firms, lower profile, not ruined, not redeemed, just exposed. That was his punishment. Men like him don't collapse dramatically, they shrink, careers flatten, opportunities narrow, rooms feel colder. One afternoon months later, he asked to meet, neutral location, public space, middle of the day. I agreed. Curiosity isn't weakness. It's closure. He arrived early. That surprised me. When he saw me, he stood. Old habit. We didn't hug. We didn't smile. We Saturday, I tell people I didn't know how bad it was, he said. I watched him closely. And? I asked, and sometimes, he continued, I almost believe it. That was the most honest thing he'd ever said. You knew, I replied, you just chose safety. He nodded slowly. I thought I was protecting us. I leaned back. No. You were protecting access. That landed. He looked down at his hands. I lost everything. No, I said quietly, you lost control. There's a difference. He looked up, then really looked. I didn't think you'd walk through it, he said. I thought you'd break. I met his eyes. That's because you never saw me, I said, not once. We sat in silence after that, not awkward, not emotional. Final, when we stood to leave, he hesitated. I'm sorry, he said. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was late. I know, I replied, and that's why it doesn't change anything. Outside, the city moved around us uninterested. That felt right. Weeks passed, then months. I rebuilt quietly. New address, new routines, new name on documents, not to erase the past, to mark distance from it. I chose work that didn't require permission, spaces that didn't monitor silence. Sometimes I'd catch myself waiting for instruction, old reflex, then I'd remember, there was no one left to ask. One evening, I received a final update. She had stepped down from everything. Officially, health reasons. Unofficially, no one wanted her near a signature again. The empire didn't fall. It transformed, smaller, cleaner, less arrogant. That was enough. I didn't feel victoried, I felt release, because the opposite of control isn't revenge. It's autonomy. I stopped being reactive, stopped checking updates, stopped explaining myself. The story no longer needed narration. It had concluded its purpose, and I had learned something essential. Survival isn't loud, strength isn't aggressive, and freedom doesn't announce itself. It just arrives. When you stop asking permission to exist, there was only one thing left to do: live, not to prove anything, but because I could. Freedom didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like a quiet morning with nowhere I was required to be. No meetings, no negotiations, no names I had to protect, just spaced. I moved cities, not dramatically, not urgently. Enough distance to let habits fade. I learned how silence feels when it isn't enforced, how choice feels when it isn't negotiated. Some nights, I still woke up alert, listening for footsteps that weren't there. Old systems don't shut down instantly, but they do shut down. One decision at a time. I stopped introducing myself through history, stopped explaining where I'd come from. The past didn't disappear. It just stopped leading. Occasionally, someone would recognize the story. They'd ask questions carefully, as if afraid of touching something sharp. I never corrected them, never clarified. Truth doesn't need repetition. It needs distance. What happened to them eventually was exactly what happens to all unchecked power. It narrowed, influence reduced, doors closed, voices softened. No collapse. No spectacle, just relevance slowly slipping away. That's the kind of ending power fears most. I never returned to that house, never walked those halls again. Some places don't deserve revisiting. They've already taken enough. Years later, I stood in a different room, signing my own documents, making decisions without witnesses. No one questioned my tone. No one monitored my pauses. I was trusted, not because of position, because of clarity. I caught my reflection in the glass, older, calmer, unfamiliar in the best way. I thought about the woman who once stood frozen while someone else decided her worth publicly. I didn't feel anger toward her. I felt respect. She survived long enough for me to exist. That was the real victory, not exposure, not consequence. Continuity, the ability to keep going without asking permission. Power had tried to define me by silence instead. Silence taught me precision. I didn't rebuild my life to prove anything. I rebuilt it because I was finally allowed to choose it. And when people ask now what happened back then, I give them the only answer that matters: I left. Not dramatically, not loudly, completely.